In the golden age of Hollywood, image wasn't just everything, it was the currency of stardom. Behind every polished close-up and romantic leading man smile was an army of studio fixers, makeup magicians, and hairstylists, sworn to protect one of the industry's most guarded secrets: baldness. Back then, losing your hair wasn't just a personal insecurity. It could end your career overnight. The studio system sold perfection, and a full head of hair was as essential to a male star's brand as his box office draw. But here's the twist. Some of cinema's most legendary icons, the men we thought were the very picture of virility and style, were actually hiding bare scalps under meticulously crafted hairpieces. And this wasn't a temporary fix. For a role, these were career-long deceptions, shielded from the public with contracts, legal threats, and photo airbrushing. For decades, audiences had no idea. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the 10 biggest names whose famous locks were as fabricated as the storylines they starred in. And I can tell you, by the time we reach number 1, you'll never watch some of your favorite films the same way again. Because while their performances may have been timeless, their hairlines, well, those were on a much tighter schedule. When you think of Humphrey Bogart, you probably picture the iconic trench coat, the tilted fedora, and that slicked-back hair glistening under the low lights of a smoky Casablanca cafe. But that hair, that perfectly combed symbol of his cool, calculated toughness, wasn't entirely his. By his early 32nd, before he even became a leading man, Bogart was already losing hair fast. When High Sierra and the Maltese Falcon catapulted him into stardom in 1941, the studios knew something had to be done. Warner Brothers brought in the finest wig makers in the business, designing hairpieces that would work seamlessly with the shadows and light of noir cinematography. Cinematographer Arthur Edison even developed special key lighting techniques to hide the transition between Bogart's scalp and the hairpiece, a delicate line that could shatter the illusion if spotted. Bogart himself became an expert in managing the trickery. If he felt a beam of light was hitting the wrong angle, he would subtly shift his stance mid-scene to protect the secret. In public, the rule was ironclad. No one, not even friends, saw him without it. Lauren Bacall later wrote that the only time he would remove his hairpiece was when swimming, and even then, photographers were banned anywhere near the pool. This was more than vanity in that era. A bald leading man wasn't mysterious or rugged. He was simply unemployable in romantic leads. The secrecy held until the very end. Even as cancer ravaged his body in the 1950s, Bogart insisted that the hairpiece be properly styled during his hospital stays. Friends recall visiting him in those final days and finding the legendary tough guy propped up in bed, fedora nearby, hairpiece perfectly in place. And yet, here's where the mystery deepens. According to some crew members, there were rare moments, late at night, when Bogart would slip it off in his dressing room, gaze at himself quietly in the mirror, and mutter that maybe the real man didn't need it at all. Was it doubt creeping in? Or the realization that the image he'd built had taken on a life of its own? Stay with me, because Bogart's secret wasn't unique. In fact, the man we're about to cover next had a hairpiece so reliable it survived flips, spins, and dances that would send most wigs flying across the set, and not once did the audience suspect a thing. Fred Astaire's elegance seemed almost supernatural, the way he glided across the floor, spinning Ginger Rogers effortlessly, never breaking a sweat, never a hair out of place. His perfectly styled head was as much a part of his brand as the tails and top hat, but the truth was that Astaire's hair had started thinning in his late 20s, long before Hollywood audiences first saw him in RKO musicals. By the time he was filming his earliest dance sequences, his famous coif was already a precision-engineered illusion. Working with Max Factor's team and his trusted makeup artist Robert Schiffer, Astaire commissioned hairpieces unlike anything seen before in Hollywood. These weren't just glued down for a few close-ups, they were engineered for survival under the most extreme conditions a musical number could throw at them. We're talking about spins, floor sweeps, leaps, and even his famous Dancing on the Ceiling number, where the set rotated 360 degrees. A normal wig might have gone tumbling halfway through, but Astaire's had a silk base instead of the usual lace, allowing for a stronger bond and better ventilation during heavy movement. His adhesive was developed specially to withstand sweat and friction, with the hold tested during rehearsals that pushed the limits of what even he could endure. He reportedly kept multiple identical hairpieces in constant rotation, each styled to match the choreography of a specific scene. If a number called for speed and turns, one piece would be cut slightly shorter for aerodynamic control. If the mood was slower and more romantic, he'd opt for a fuller look. But here's the part audiences never knew: Ginger Rogers, ever the professional, had to remember not to run her fingers through his hair during romantic scenes. "Fred would never have forgiven me," she joked years later, "if I'd dislodged his little friend." Astaire treated his hairpieces as part of his costume kit, storing them alongside his cufflinks and patent leather shoes, always handled only by a select few stylists sworn to secrecy. The perfection was so seamless that in decades of work, there was never a single documented case of his hairpiece shifting or coming loose on camera, a record that remains one of Hollywood's quiet marvels. But if you think the pressure of hiding baldness was intense for a man in a tuxedo, wait until you hear about the star who had to maintain his hairpiece under the blazing sun, whipping winds, and dust storms of the Wild West. A man whose on-screen persona could never, under any circumstances, look like it had been crafted in a Hollywood workshop. John Wayne wasn't just a movie star, he was the embodiment of the American frontier. The towering cowboy whose slow drawl and square-jawed authority made him the ultimate symbol of rugged masculinity. But behind the Stetson and the stern gaze was a reality the public never suspected. By his late 30s, right around the time Stagecoach made him a household name in 1939, Wayne's hairline had already begun its retreat. In an era when the cowboy image meant strength, virility, and a certain untamed perfection, a balding duke was unthinkable. Hollywood wigmakers went to work, but unlike the sleek city looks designed for stars like Cary Grant, Wayne's hairpieces were crafted to look slightly rough, sun-dried, and windblown, as though they'd been through a week on the range. His longtime stylist, Charlie Jamora, recalled designing each piece with deliberate imperfection, a few uneven tufts, strands, angled to look like they'd been shaped by the desert breeze rather than a makeup chair. And while the artistry was impressive, the real challenge came on set. Wayne's films were often shot in brutal outdoor locations like Monument Valley, where dust storms, whipping winds, and scorching sun conspired to lift or shift even the best secured piece. For riding scenes, his wardrobe team devised a special bandana worn beneath his cowboy hat, engineered to keep the hairpiece in place during gallops, brawls, and stunt work. And Wayne wasn't precious about it. Friends say he treated the hairpiece like any other part of his costume, something to be put on before the cameras rolled and taken off without ceremony in trusted company. Still, that trust had boundaries. If someone outside his inner circle walked into the room, the hairpiece went right back on, as instinctively as a sheriff holstering his gun. Once, during a break between takes, a young actor noticed Wayne adjusting it and asked if it was uncomfortable. The Duke, without missing a beat, growled, "It's hotter than a tin roof in August, but the ladies seem to like it. So it stays." That mix of practicality and bravado defined his approach. But it also created a fascinating paradox. Audiences believed they were seeing an unvarnished man of the West, when in reality, one of his most defining physical traits had been crafted in a Hollywood workshop. And yet, the illusion was so strong that it became part of the truth. Wayne's hair, real or not, was as much a part of the Western mythos as his six-shooter and saddle. But if you think his was the height of Hollywood's perfectionist fakery, consider the next man, a leading man so polished, so immaculately styled, that his hairpieces cost 10 times more than anyone else's and were built to be invisible even in extreme close-ups. Cary Grant wasn't just a movie star, he was a living archetype, the man critic Pauline Kael called the man from Dream City, a vision of sophistication whose tailored suits and flawless hair made him the gold standard of male elegance. Yet by his mid-30s, Just as he was cementing his status as Hollywood's premier romantic lead, Grant's own hairline had begun its quiet retreat. For an actor whose appeal was inextricably tied to physical perfection, this was a crisis the studios couldn't leave to chance. Enter Del Armstrong, Grant's longtime makeup artist, who oversaw the creation of hairpieces so advanced they were practically invisible. Every strand was hand-knotted into a base so fine it could survive even the most unforgiving close-ups. They cost 10 times more than what other leading men wore, far surpassing the pieces worn by contemporaries like Robert Taylor, who also had MGM's top stylists protecting his image. Grant's hairpieces were made in multiple variations, each tailored to the role. In romantic comedies like The Philadelphia Story, the look was impossibly perfect, every strand in place. In adventure films like Gunga Din, the hair was styled looser, as though touched by wind and sweat. But Grant's genius and his wig makers was in letting the hairpieces age with him. As he moved into his later years, the artificial hair grayed and thinned naturally, avoiding the jarring contrast that plagued others, like William Holden in the 1960s, whose more youthful hairpieces began to look increasingly out of place. Grant was famously private about the whole arrangement, but among trusted friends, he could joke about it. Alfred Hitchcock once recalled Grant referring to his wig as therapy for a traumatic condition, insisting it wasn't vanity, just good business sense. "The public pays to see Cary Grant," he would say. "Not a bald man they don't recognize." Yet there's an intriguing duality here. While he built a career on a flawless facade, Grant was also one of the rare stars willing to let a little reality slip through in the details, just enough to keep the illusion believable. And if Grant's perfectionism kept the illusion airtight, our next subject went the opposite route, choosing to make his hairpieces look slightly imperfect because he knew his everyman charm depended on not looking too perfect at all. James Stewart built his career on authenticity. His lanky frame, hesitant drawl, and small-town charm made him Hollywood's definitive everyman, a man audiences trusted to be real in a world of artifice. But even Stewart had a secret tucked neatly above his forehead. By the time It's a Wonderful Life hit theaters in 1946, his hairline had already begun its slow retreat, but Stewart didn't rush to cover it. For years, he let the thinning show in roles like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where the slight recession only added to his relatability. But as he entered his 40s, particularly during the Hitchcock collaborations like Rear Window and Vertigo, the pressure to maintain a fuller look became unavoidable. His solution wasn't the flawless perfection of Cary Grant, nor the rugged camouflage of John Wayne Stewart. Insisted his hairpieces look a little lived in, slightly imperfect, as if they were his real hair on an average day. Makeup artist Charles Schramm recalled Stewart's standing order: "No hair helmet. I want a regular guy's head." This approach mirrored Spencer Tracy's, whose early wigs were designed to subtly fill in thinning spots without creating an obvious piece. Burt Lancaster, too, favored practicality over vanity, demanding reinforced hairpieces that could survive his stunt-heavy swashbucklers without looking staged. Stewart's pragmatism extended beyond the screen. On set, he treated his hairpiece like a costume accessory, no different from putting on a jacket or tying a tie. There was no drama, no secrecy, just part of the job. Off-set, he allowed it to thin and gray with age, which preserved his believability even in his 60s and 70s. But here's where the contrast bites. Audiences accepted Stewart's understated approach, but for others like William Holden, visible hair inconsistencies became a distraction, especially in grueling film shoots where humidity or heat could betray the illusion. Stewart's quiet management of his appearance kept his image intact for decades, yet it also illustrates an unspoken truth. Even the most relatable ordinary man in Hollywood couldn't afford to let reality entirely replace illusion. And speaking of reality, here's a quick moment for you, the viewer. If you've been glued to these stories so far, that means you're the kind of person who catches the hidden details others miss. So why not make sure you never miss our next investigation? Hit that subscribe button right now Give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment telling us which of these stars you never suspected. Trust me, the second half of this list contains reveals even Hollywood insiders would be shocked to hear. And the next name we're about to uncover? His hairpiece was so integral to his image that it became a running joke among his closest friends, including the Rat Pack. Yet to the public, the illusion was so cool, it actually enhanced his legend. Frank Sinatra's transformation from the skinny swoonatra of the 1940s to the impeccably dressed chairman of the board was one of the most deliberate reinventions in entertainment history, and his hair was no small part of that evolution. By his early 30s, Sinatra's hairline had begun its inevitable retreat, a fact that could have undercut the suave, unflappable persona he was building. Around 1954, as his career reignited with From Here to Eternity and his groundbreaking Capitol Records albums, Sinatra began wearing custom hairpieces designed to match not just his head, but his brand. He had stage pieces styled for the harsh, hot glare of performance lighting, film pieces crafted to look completely natural on camera, and casual pieces for day-to-day life. Within his inner circle, the hairpiece became an open secret, even a prop in private jokes. Dean Martin might slyly refer to Frank's little helper up top during a Las Vegas show, and Sammy Davis Jr. would rib him in rehearsals. But the teasing always stopped short in public, where the image had to remain intact. Sinatra himself sometimes used humor to deflect. His valet, George Jacobs, recalled the time Frank mailed his hairpiece to Dean after a particularly wild night, with a note, "Even I needed the day off." Still, he was fiercely protective of the illusion when it came to strangers or the press. That balance between control and self-awareness was echoed by Bob Hope, who also wore a piece for most of his career. Hope, unlike Sinatra, occasionally let the gag into his act, when performing for troops, tilting the piece for a laugh or adjusting it mid-punchline, but never in front of a mass broadcast audience. Both men understood that the public's trust in a performer's image was fragile. A small crack could change how audiences perceived everything else. Sinatra's genius was in making the hairpiece part of the mystique. It didn't wear him, he wore it. And perhaps that's why the public never suspected, because the swagger, the voice, and the presence overshadowed whatever was on his head. But in our next case, the hairpiece wasn't just a support to the image. It had to survive feats of physical endurance that would have sent most wigs tumbling. This actor's on-screen athleticism was legendary, and behind the scenes, his hairpiece had to be as tough as the man wearing it. Burt Lancaster's screen presence was all force and motion. A former circus acrobat whose lean, muscular frame and piercing stare made him one of the most dynamic actors of the post-war era. Whether he was swinging from the rigging in The Crimson Pirate or lunging through sword fights in The Flame and the Arrow, Lancaster looked like a man carved out of pure physical confidence. But by his late 30s, as his career was hitting its peak, his hairline had already begun to fade, threatening the very image audiences had bought into. Early noir appearances like The Killers revealed a slight recession, but once he transitioned to Technicolor adventures and romantic leads, the change was quietly managed with increasingly sophisticated hairpieces. For Lancaster, the issue wasn't about vanity so much as physics. His roles demanded flips, dives, and fight choreography that would rip a lesser wig right off. His stunt coordinator, Lou Elias, revealed they had to reinforce Burt's hairpieces with spirit gum and fine mesh so strong it could survive mid-air somersaults without shifting an inch. Lancaster approached the process with total professionalism, treating the hairpiece like a prop that required the same precision as a sword or a harness. Between takes, if an adjustment was needed, he'd call in his stylist without hesitation or self-consciousness. Offset, his friend Kirk Douglas would joke that Lancaster's performance enhancer gave him an unfair advantage with women, and Lancaster would fire back that Douglas was just jealous his natural hair didn't look half as good as the bought kind. Lancaster's practical, even playful approach kept the illusion intact for decades, but it also underscores a reality of the studio era. The pressure to maintain a marketable image didn't let up, no matter how physically gifted you were. And for the next star, that pressure had a cruel irony. He was known for playing men who'd survived war, captivity, and brutal hardship. Yet his most frustrating daily battle was keeping his hairpiece in place under the unforgiving conditions of real-life location shoots in sweltering jungles. William Holden's career was one of Hollywood's most remarkable reinventions, from the fresh-faced charm of Golden Boy to the cynical, world-weary edge of Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17. But as his characters aged and hardened on screen, Holden faced a physical transformation behind the scenes that the public never saw. By his early 30s, his hair was thinning rapidly, a problem that coincided almost exactly with his career resurgence in the early 1950s. In Sunset Boulevard, his hairline was still his own, if noticeably receded, but by the time he stepped onto the set of Stalag 17, in 1953, he was relying on hairpieces. Paramount's chief hairdresser, Larry Germain, initially designed them to match his earlier look exactly, filling in the gaps without changing the overall shape. As time passed, the pieces were made fuller, but always with a slightly receded temple to preserve the familiar Holden silhouette audiences knew. While Robert Taylor's studio-controlled image dictated a perfectly managed, always-on hairline from his early career, Holden's was more reactive, born out of necessity. The difference was in their comfort levels. Taylor treated his hairpiece as part of his brand, while Holden seemed to resent the requirement entirely. Off-set, he often removed it among friends and grumbled about the inauthenticity. This discomfort became a real problem during grueling location shoots. In The Bridge on the River Kwai, filmed in the steaming jungles of Ceylon, the combination of humidity and heat made the hairpiece difficult to maintain. Keen-eyed viewers can spot small inconsistencies from scene to scene, something Holden likely noticed and hated. As the 1960s and 70s rolled on, his heavy drinking began to take a visible toll, and the hairpieces became more obvious in films like The Wild Bunch and The Towering Inferno. It was a cruel irony. For a man who made his name playing characters stripped of illusions, one of his most enduring illusions had to be maintained until the end. But if Holden's struggle with authenticity made the hairpiece a reluctant burden, our next star treated it as a purely technical tool, something to be worn without ego, removed without fuss, and maintained only as long as the role required. Spencer Tracy built his reputation on absolute authenticity. Directors, critics, and audiences all agreed he didn't seem to be acting so much as existing truthfully on screen. That naturalism was his brand, which made the quiet addition of a hairpiece in the early 1950s an exercise in subtlety that rivaled any performance he ever gave. By his early 50s, Tracy's hair had thinned enough to require help, but MGM understood that slapping a thick, youthful wig on him would shatter the illusion of a middle-aged man grounded in reality. Makeup artist William Tuttle designed the early pieces to simply fill in what was missing, matching the natural hairline so closely that the change was invisible even to repeat viewers. Over the years, the pieces became slightly fuller, but never so much that anyone could point to a sudden, suspiciously lush mane. Tracy approached it with pure pragmatism, no vanity, no secrecy tantrums, just another part of the kit, like a costume or a prop. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. shared that same professional detachment, though his was tinged with aristocratic polish. Fairbanks, facing his own early hair loss, viewed the hairpiece the way an English gentleman views a fine suit, of the highest quality, perfectly maintained, and never discussed. Both men allowed their pieces to age, with them graying, thinning, and losing volume in step with the rest of their appearance, which preserved credibility in a way that younger, thicker replacements never could. In private, Tracy would sometimes remove this damn thing, as he called it, in front of Katharine Hepburn, one of the few people he trusted completely. But in public, the image stayed intact, because in Hollywood's golden age, even the most respected actor knew that authenticity had limits when the cameras were rolling. That delicate balance between illusion and reality takes us to our final case. A man whose image was so indelibly tied to suave, dangerous cool that his producers considered his hairpiece as essential to the character as the gun in his hand. And then, in a move almost unheard of for a star of his magnitude, he decided to take it off and never put it back on again. When Sean Connery first stepped onto the screen as James Bond in Dr. No in 1962, audiences saw the embodiment of a suave, dangerous secret agent, immaculate tuxedo, perfectly groomed hair and a confidence that seemed untouchable. But what they didn't see was that the hair was an illusion from day one. Connery began losing his hair alarmingly early, with visible thinning by his mid-20s, years before the world knew his name. The Bond producers understood that 007 couldn't be balding. The image relied on perfection, so they commissioned reinforced hairpieces that could withstand everything from high-speed chases to underwater fight scenes. Special adhesives were used to keep the piece secure during action sequences, with stylists on standby to ensure not a single strand shifted. For over a decade, Connery wore those pieces not just for Bond, but for nearly every role he played. The illusion so seamless that few suspected the truth. But by the early 1970s, Connery made a decision almost unheard of for a leading man of his stature. He stopped wearing hairpieces for most roles. In Diamonds Are Forever, Bond still had his full head of cinematic hair, but just 2 years later, in The Offense, Connery appeared on screen with his natural baldness fully visible. It wasn't a quiet fade-out, it was a deliberate choice. He was done with the discomfort, the maintenance, and the constant artifice. Director Sidney Lumet later recalled Connery's reasoning: "I'm not Bond anymore. I don't need to maintain that perfect image. Let's show the real me." It was a risk. Conventional wisdom said leading men couldn't go bald without losing their appeal, but Connery defied it. His later performances in films like The Untouchables and The Hunt for Red October proved that confidence, charisma, and screen presence could be as seductive as a perfect hairline. In doing so, Connery carved out a second phase of his career that was arguably just as iconic as his Bond years, and he paved the way for future stars to embrace baldness without losing status. In a way, his choice was the ultimate subversion of Hollywood's obsession with illusion, a reminder that while the hairpieces of the golden age kept countless careers alive, the truth, when revealed with confidence, could be just as powerful. And there you have it, 10 of Hollywood's most enduring legends. Men whose images were so carefully constructed that even their hair was part of the performance. From Bogart's shadow-shielded slickback to Astaire's dance-proof perfection. From Wayne's wind-blown frontier crown to Grant's flawlessly tailored coif. These stars carried a secret on their heads for decades, and the public never knew. Each hairpiece was more than just a vanity accessory. It was a silent co-star, a piece of cinematic technology as essential to the illusion as lighting, costume, and camera work. The length studios went to the contracts, the secrecy, the artistry showed just how much the golden age relied on crafting images the public could believe in without question. But as Connery proved, there's more than one way to be iconic. Confidence, presence, and skill can outshine even the most artful disguise. Which of these revelations surprised you the most? Had you spotted any clues before hearing this? Let us know in the comments. Your take might just end up in our next deep dive. And if you've been captivated by this look behind the curtain, don't forget, this is what we do at Rewinding Legends, uncovering the hidden stories, the untold truths, and the forgotten details that shape the stars and shows you thought you knew. So hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up so we can keep bringing you the Hollywood history no one else dares to tell. Until next time, keep your eyes open, because in this town, the magic is always just one clever illusion away.